Hey there! Today we're going to talk about a very specific red ink. And someone suggested to do an Inkcyclopedia entry on that ink. I think in my coverage of Bay State Blue, I'm not absolutely sure. It doesn't really matter. People wanted to see, at least one person wanted to see an Inkcyclopedia entry for that. And that makes a lot of sense because it's an interesting ink. It's, I think, a popular ink. And incidentally, it was one of the first bottles of ink I ever bought. So I do kind of like it. Now, I'm talking about an ink which was made by Herbin. It's known as 1670, also known as 1670 in English, and also known as Rouge Hematite. It has a bunch of names. It was, I think, a limited edition at first, and then they decided to produce it anyway, and it looks like this. Yes, that's right, I switched the bottles because, believe it or not, I didn't like the original bottle. I'm probably the only person on earth, but I thought the neck of the bottle was too narrow. It's beautiful, it had wax seal on it and all kinds of stuff. It's beautiful, but sealing wax seal, you know what I mean? It was on that, it was great, it was awesome, but I just didn't like it. So I put it in an empty Waterman bottle I had anyway, and I think it's a very nice ink. Now, in the late 1600s, people started to have natural cabinets, cabinets of curiosities, stuff like fetuses and snakes and things. One of my favorite books is also one of my biggest books. That's right, it's this big, it's huge. This is the catalog of a collection by Albertus Seba, who was a Dutch guy who ran he sold drugs, and it's interesting. He had a huge collection, and on the cover of this book, bloody hell, it's heavy. There is a sort of this blood coral. Now, it's interesting. Bang! There you go. It's interesting. That just was a sort of like a brainwave because this ink is like blood. You can probably see it. I got it in a pen here. It's typical, and I like it. It's a deep red. When it's wet, it's just like venous blood. It's really a light red, but very intense red, and I love that. Now, when it dries, it gets a bit darker, and I would prefer to have seen an ink that is the same color dry as wet. Now, that never really happens, but there's quite a big difference between wet and dry versions of this ink. Nevertheless, I love it. Another thing you should look out for in the writing sample, I'll do because I will shut up in a few seconds, don't worry. One thing that's interesting about this ink is that it has a gold sheen, which it develops when it dries, especially if you use a very broad nib, you'll really see that. So, for example, for calligraphy, this can be a very interesting ink if you're looking for a gold sheen, but if you really want a red, then you won't get it. It will be a dark red with a gold sheen, which can be more or less annoying depending on what you're trying to do and what effect you're trying to attain, but just bear that in mind. Okay, enough talk. Let's do writing sample. Okay, so here we go. There's actually a thunderstorm going on outside. So it's interesting that you may hear some background noise every now and then of a loud thunderclap, which will just add to the general atmosphere, I think. Okay, so what do we have here? Here we have Herbin 1670. These numbers remain difficult. 1670, 6010. Okay, so that's 70. Right, so what do we have? Well, let's start with the fine nib in non-flex mode. So what you'll see here is that it's a pretty red ink, right? It's just red. Now, you may already see in the bit here that's drying that it tends to get a bit of that gold sheen I was talking about. But you know, we'll see that a lot better in the double and triple pass tests later on, I think. Medium. Now you really start to see the very red. This is okay. We know which goes with which, right? You see the redness. It's a deep red, and I mean, if I would own dozens of bottles of this stuff if the ink dried up in the exact way and the exact color it has now. I love that red, but when it dries up, it just gets a little different. Okay. Broad. This is like writing with blood. Writing with blood reminds me of that one anecdote where I was in the train and I was doing a bit of writing with one of those Noodler's eyedropper pens you get with some of the inks. And I had one which was inked up with Nikita, Noodler's Nikita, which is also very blood red. And it wasn't a pen, and the pen has a clear barrel, so you can really see it. And I pulled that out and I did some writing, but it didn't start up. So I sort of tapped the paper a few times gently, and then a big drop of that red ink just sort of spilled. It just, you know, flew from the nib onto the paper. And the lady next to me looked at the paper, looked at me, looked at the paper again, looked at me, got up, walked away, took another seat. So I think she actually thought I was a serial killer who put blood in my pens or something. So here we have the italic nib. I'll adjust the lighting a bit. That's the best I can do right now. So there we go. Now, again, when we move to this point, let me see if I can use a loop here to sort of zoom in on that just a little bit. I have to align this somehow with the camera. That's difficult for me because I completely lack motor skill. Oh, there we go. This is not really helping, is it? I wanted to show you this sort of gold sheen, but I don't think you see it very well like this. Well, it doesn't matter. You will probably see it in the high-res pictures. This was just a valiant attempt which can now safely be ignored. Okay, let's do a passes test. Move the paper a bit. There we go. So here we have one pass. Here we have two. I mean, now it's just one, but it's going to be two. And here we will have three. So we have 1, 2, 3 passes. We'll have to wait for this to dry, right? Let's do another bit of writing. Let's try to emphasize the flex a bit more. This is a question I really get a lot. What does this ink look like in a flex pen? Well, like this. I'll just say this once again. If you can't really see what I'm doing, or you don't like the lighting or whatever, just you know, you can always take one of the high-res shots and just, you know, watch at those, or look at those when I'm explaining what I'm doing here. So we got flex and we have fine. We have some medium. rather strangely aligned here. We have broad, what was it again? It was a broad bricht moonlit nicht or something? I forgot. Seems to be a bit dark to me. Let me see if I can adjust the lighting a bit. The answer is no. I have a fairly bright desk light and it's currently pointed at the paper. This is the best I can do. Sorry. Italic. You hear the thunder in the background? Italic. Okay, let's have a look at how we're doing with these passes. Do you see the gold sheen right there? I'm not sure how well the camera picks it up. It's a bit of a detail and it depends a little bit on the lighting, I'm afraid. I'm not going to do that loop thing again because that wasn't a great success, but I'll do another pass here. And another one there. Then I'll return for the third pass in a minute. While we're at this, and I got this nib here. Let's see, we have a red. Fantasy R. Okay, we'll have that dry. Let's do a bit of writing with a fine... Oh dear, I got ink in the cap. And now it's probably on my hands. Yes, of course it is. Well, I enjoy suffering for you people. I'm just kidding, of course. Right, there we go. 1670. Rouge Hematite. Just let that dry for a second. Speaking of dry, how dry an ink is this? A long sentence. It's not exactly dry. I wait for a bit more. Well, drier. Well, not the driest ink in the world, I'd say. It has good flow. I hadn't even tested these pens prior to doing the video, so I just inked them up. I didn't even make sure they would actually write, but they did straight away, as you could see. So that's a good thing. Now, in my experience, this ink can cause some nib creep. It's not uncommon. I probably don't have it right now, but it's not uncommon for some ink to get onto the nib, and you get a sort of weird gold sheen on your nib too, which may be nice if you're looking to turn a stainless steel nib into a gold-plated nib. Of course, I exaggerate a bit now, but you can actually get that. So that is something you will have to deal with. It's not a big issue. And it's very easy to clean off. Just flush it with water a bit and you should be fine, but you know, just that will happen. As to cleaning, well, it is a red. I always find reds to be a bit stubborn to get out of some pens, but it's not a terrible ink. I've never seen this stain plastic or anything, so I guess you should be pretty good with that. Okay, so this is dry. The R is not yet completely dry. What I'll do is I'll grab my brush and I'll do a bit of a pass. Okay, so that's what happens when you do this. This ink was completely dry, so for artists this is interesting in its own regard, but don't expect the ink to last under water pressure. So let's do a bit of a scorecard and wait. Well, this is still not entirely. You see that the drying time is a bit steep, I think, because with Base State Blue I was, at this point I could easily do the third pass, but it's still wet. But that's fine, that's okay. We'll just do a scorecard. Color. Well, I'd say this is a nice red, a deep red. Not a dark red, but a deep red, a saturated red. Shading. Well, it depends on the pen, but with a flex nib you can definitely get some. I would say it's good. It's not excellent, but it's not poor either. So it's interesting. When I put this in my Visconti Opera Elements, which has a particularly springy nib, then it can really go from a crimson red to a much darker red. So that's actually pretty cool. Flow. Well, I'd say flow is very good. Again, I can't really recall some startup issues unless you leave this ink in a pen and don't use it for a couple of days. Now I think a lot of inks will give you issues then, but with this ink you may get some startup issues, but if you do a lot of writing then you should be good. Then we have feathering. Well, on this paper, I'm just taking a quick peek there. No, I really don't see any feathering, not even in the broadest nib, not in the nib while it's flexed. So I would say feathering is good, but we will have to check it out on copier paper, because I do remember putting this in an AHAB and thinking, alright, that was not such a great idea. So when you're really flexing to the max, then it may feather, but then again, which ink doesn't, right? There are only a few that really don't do that, I think. We have drying time. I would say medium to long, because it does take a while. Then we have waterproofness. This is still not dry, but this is, so I'll just return to that right now. I think my camera will make it all look like a dark red, but in the video, just check out the still pictures later on. There we go, third pass. Okay, waterproofness, still a bit wettish. I'm just going to cheat a bit then, use a bit of blotting paper. Otherwise this will take very long, I'm afraid. Okay, well that's dry enough. Do that so as not to ruin the next page. You can't see what I did. I just put a piece of plastic under the paper. Well, isn't that fascinating? Let's just leave that be for a sec. Cleaning. Oh, yes, cleaning. I'd say cleaning is medium. It's not an ink that you will just clean out, in the easiest way possible. So you may have to take a bit of time for that, but you will get it out of your pen completely. And then we have bleed through. Well, that is something we will have to evaluate in a second. First, let us get rid of this water. Well, you can still see this just a bit, but I would say waterproofness is, well, poor to medium at best. Then again, no claims were made that this would be a particularly waterproof ink, of course, but, you know. Poor to medium. Nothing wrong with that, it's just that it's not a true waterproof ink. Okay, so here we got the samples. Nice, they go from a deep red to a much darker, almost blood red, I would say. The Venus blood, probably. In any case, bleed through. See any? I don't. I see it a bit there, but come on, that's a very broad nib with 3 passes. Here I don't see a lot. That was water. I mean, you will see some shade through. That's normal. Of course, this is Rhodia paper, so it's good quality paper. Let's move over, move on, whatever you like to call it, to some cheap copier paper. This was under my Bay State Blue sample, so there is a bit of Bay State Blue on there, but I'll just turn it over. There's nothing wrong with the paper. There we go. We have a fine nib. We have a medium nib. There's a bit of a skip there, and here the ink has incubated and is now starting to skip a little. Strange, but true. Broad nib. You don't mess with this nib, do you? It's a nice wet patch. I'll come back to that in a second. And then we got the italic. Big brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. This was not a skip, this was me angling the pen incorrectly. There's no skipping there, see? Except for that point, where again I dug into the paper. Alright, so what else should I do here? Well, while we're at it, might as well do a bit of a very broad nib. That's a really weird letter. I don't know how I came up with that. It's not really Gothic, it's nothing. Well, it doesn't really matter. It's red. You can paint your house with this nib. It'll only take you 15 minutes. Okay. Of course it's going to run when it's wet, right? Water. There we go. That's nice and runny. And yet, actually, I mean, this ink was really wet, and I put quite some water on there, and it's still there a bit. You could still read that. So maybe the waterproofness is not as bad as I thought it was. Still not great. Oh, my desk chair is squeaking. May need a new desk chair. Well, anyway, so here we have it. Here you see, perhaps, I'm not sure, a little bit of that gold sheen again. And here you're already starting to see it near the corners. You see it there a bit. Not sure why you can see that, but you may see that on the photographs. So, bleed through. Yep. We got it there. Oh, sorry, we got it there. We got it here. But, you know, this point, that's really where I did a lot of inking. So with the writing, I'm just trying to hold the desk light behind this so you can see it a bit. There's a bit of shade through, but there really is no bleed through. I would say I mean, except for, you know, these really big patches of ink. So I say, I think my original opinion is warranted, and that is that bleed through is good. No issues there. So, there you have it. Herbin, 1670. 1670. I only set that to impress you. Did it work? So I think this is a very nice red. I love it. I would love it even better if it would be the same color dry as it is wet. Really dark blood red. I think that's beautiful. It dries up a bit darker than I would personally like, but you have to admit this is a pretty cool ink. The gold sheen is not for everyone. I don't care much for it. Some people think it's awesome. Of course, that's really a matter of taste. You cannot deny it's a special ink. It's different. It will stand out. So get it now, I would say. And that's all there's to it. So I hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Look at these hands. Look at what you people make me do. Actually, I like doing it, so that's absolutely fine. Okay, well, see you later. Bye-bye.